Hi, so we're going to wrap up our study of Plato this time by looking at a portion of his dialogue called the Symposium. I mentioned last time that Xenophon also has a dialogue called the Symposium, and I told you that that's basically symposium is a kind of a drinking party. I want to say a little bit more about that before jumping into Plato's text. The Symposium in ancient Athens, which is where Plato and Socrates lived, was actually a pretty distinctive event, and it was specifically an activity of the aristocrats having these drinking parties, drinking events. What we're going to read here is a part of the dialogue that has Socrates at one of these drinking parties. And that's a little bit like, I guess, going to the country club, an evening at the country club. Right? It's not the sort of thing the average person is going to go to. It's something for the rich, the affluent, the powerful. So that's the character of the event to begin with. And I want to say a couple more things about it. At the symposium, the participants here and in general would all be men. They would be the wealthy male aristocrats. Women don't really have a place in these things. Indeed, in Athenian society in general, women were secluded and had quite different rights from men. And at things like this, at events like this, the only women who would be there would be basically prostitutes or entertainers. If women were there, they were basically objects to be used by the men. So that's the character of the event. So it's aristocratic. It's male dominated. Socrates is there. Well, that's a kind of an interesting thing. Socrates himself, you saw him in that in the Apology. He says about himself, and nobody doubts this, that he was poor. But nobody's actually quite sure about Socrates' history. People don't know whether Socrates, came from a line of peasants, or whether he came from a poor family that had formerly been aristocratic. There's some debate about that. But regardless of the context of his past, the fact is Socrates was a poor man, not an aristocrat in this case. But he spends a lot of time with aristocrats at this kind of event, symposium. But in all of the dialogue, Socrates is usually talking to aristocrats, and especially the younger children of the rich and powerful. And in fact, when he was put on trial and sentenced to death, many people, when they read that speech, think that Socrates was convicted and executed unjustly. And that was, people had that view at the time too. And so in Xenophon, the very guy we looked at last time a little bit, in his writings, he asks, why did this happen? And he thinks that Socrates was executed unjustly because of his association with the aristocrats. His trial came at the time that there had just been basically a kind of an oligarchic overthrow of the democracy that Athens had been for a century. So Athens is kind of the place that more or less invented democracy in our world, in the human world. But it was the democracy was eliminated and replaced by an oligarchy, which means rule by a small and powerful, wealthy few. It was ruled by an oligarchy for a while, and then there was a little revolt, and the democracy was restored. Socrates' trial was right after that, and Xenophon thinks that maybe Socrates was put to death because of his association in people's eyes with those aristocrats, and that his trial was really a way of getting back at those bad people who they thought had just done this bad thing. I don't know if that's true or not, but I wanted to mention that because, again, I wanted to draw this connection between Socrates and the aristocrats, perhaps in popular perception, in the simple fact that he talks to them all the time in his dialogues, and then something like this, here he is going to a distinctly aristocratic event. The thing I want to draw your attention to, though, is the way that he actually sits in that a little bit uncomfortably. I mean, I think if you went back and read more fully the Apology, you would see that many of his values are not the aristocratic values. He's actually pretty much a defender of the democracy, for example. But here especially, I want to underline one thing, one very important thing I think that he's doing, that is a substantial challenge to that tradition. And that is, the thing we're going to read is Socrates presenting to you someone else's speech, and it's the speech of a woman. This is the most important part of one of the most important dialogues that Plato wrote. And in doing that, Plato portrays Socrates as giving away his chance to speak to let the voice of a woman come out. The woman is Diotima, and Socrates refers to her as a wise woman. He says she was wise in many things, even beyond the thing he's going to talk about. And so I think it's quite interesting. Socrates is always questioning about wisdom. What is wisdom? Well, here he's going to present to you the perspective of a wise person, and it's a wise woman. And even more, why does he do that? He says, she's the one from whom I learned stuff. What did he learn? Well, the speech is going to be about Eros. I'll say something about Eros again in a minute. Speech is going to be about Eros, and he says, she's the one who taught me that. She's the one who taught me erotics. And so we're going to go on to see the quite important and powerful meaning of Eros, or sexual passion, erotic passion. We're going to see why that's so significant in human life, and he's going to say that most important lesson he learned from her. But I also want to draw attention to one other thing. Like we saw in the Apology that's what Socrates famously did, was go around questioning people. It's so famous, in fact, that we call this thing Socratic method when people do what Socrates did. Namely, he wouldn't tell you what his view was. That wasn't what he was about. He was trying to investigate your view, help you investigate your view to see if you really knew what you were talking about. So, Socrates' method is to go to people and get them to talk about what they think to be their wisdom or whatever. And then, through asking them questions about that, to determine whether the views those people hold really make sense or not. And that has, been very powerful throughout history as a pedagogical method, a method of teaching, right? Not just to tell people things you want them to know, but by asking questions to get people to work through their own ideas and become self-critical and learn to think for themselves. And that's the power and the point of the Socratic method. So the thing I want to draw your attention to here is, Socrates' speech about Diotima and so on comes up in the conversation just after another person named Agathon has given a speech about Eros. And Socrates has just done his traditional thing. He's asked Agathon questions about what he just said, to see if it makes sense or not. And the thing he then says is, oh, well, the kind of questioning I just did to Agathon, that's exactly what Diotima did to me when I was young and I met her. And the reason I want to mention that is, in addition to the sort of straightforward and obvious way that he's presenting Diotima as the source of his insight into erotics, he doesn't exactly say this, but maybe it's implied there that she's the one who actually taught him that Socratic method, that she's the one who introduced that method of question and answer that became his distinctive practice. If that's true, that's pretty interesting, because then this little bit of Plato's, probably most important and one of his very most famous dialogues throughout history. Like, I don't just mean in the 21st century. I mean, it has always been read and studied and well known and important to people. It'd be interesting if here Plato is actually portraying, a woman as more or less the source of philosophy. Women were excluded from things like the Symposium. And here, Socrates brings in a woman, not as a prostitute or a flute girl, but as a profound speaker, indeed the best speaker. But also, women have been excluded from the academy, from the sciences, from the philosophy, from the big studies. Like, we don't typically study women. We haven't typically thought that, they're the ones who are contributing the great philosophical works and so on. So again, it's pretty interesting if Plato is here identifying a woman as the source of that very tradition of philosophy. And why do I say very traditional? Well, to the extent that Socrates himself would kind of think of as the paradigmatic philosopher, or kind of the place where that whole thing really gets going. So it's interesting if behind Socrates there's actually this wise woman. Anyway, that's just a thing to get you thinking right off the bat as you read this. And that's one of the things about Plato. There's a lot more to it than just a set of particular arguments. Somebody says this about this position and you think about whether or not it's true. There's a lot more depth to the Platonic writings in the same way that there's depth to any work of literature. And this is just an example of one of the things you might think about as you're reading the Symposium here and its portrayal of erotics. So let's talk about the main topic here, which is Eros. That's what the people are making speeches about at this symposium, just as they were in Xenophon's Symposium, and that's why we're studying it. So what is Eros? So it's the Greek word that is the root of our word erotic, right? And so we think of erotic passion or sexual passion, right? So Eros names that names something like sexuality. That would be the most straightforward translation. But I'm going to try not to translate it particularly when I talk about it. And in our book, it's translated as love, and that's commonly how it's translated. In this work, it's commonly translated as love. In other contexts, differently, but here it's commonly translated as love. Why love and not sex? Well, or why not sexuality? Because one of the points that's going to be made here is that Eros is not a simple and obvious thing. We associate it with a sex drive or something like that. And by sex drive, we think of that desire to engage in sort of bodily genital coupling and so on. And no doubt that's relevant to it. But one of the important points that's going to be made here is that there's actually quite a bit more to Eros than that exact thing. And so translating it love can help because we actually use the word love more broadly. And so when the translators use the word love for Eros, they're using an English word that sort of lets you be prepared for hearing a whole range of different things. Whereas if they just translated it as sex drive all along, it wouldn't quite make sense. Anyway, I say that because I want you to try to remember that the word here is Eros, and not get distracted by the simple fact of the word love. Try to remember that the issue here is that we don't want to foreclose our interpretation of what that is. We don't want to be so quick to think that we know what Eros or sexuality is. We already saw that a bit in the Phaedrus because in Lysias' speech there's a pretty familiar interpretation of what sex is, but Socrates' speech was geared towards saying no, there's more going on there than you recognize, right? And that you don't really quite know what your sexuality is. Remember, he says, the person struck by another beautiful person would feel kind of a shudder and fear, and in a way you don't quite know what's happening to you, right? And that's the thing I'd like you to try to hold on to, the idea that your sexuality or your Eros is something that you feel, something you sort of undergo, but maybe you don't quite know what it is yet. And what you're in the habit of doing is interpreting it. You're in the habit of saying, oh, I know what that is, and then acting in accordance with your interpretation. But our goal here is to get behind that interpretation back to whatever that drive is, whatever that experience is, and try to figure out what it is, to have it as a bit more of a question. Anyway, so that's what we're looking at here. And in the speech in the Symposium, Diotima is going to basically pair talking about Eros with talking about beauty. We talked about beauty already in the Phaedrus, but so that's what our theme is going to be. We're going to continue looking at beauty and how that's related to Eros. Okay, so let's turn to the actual speech, beginning with a little bit that comes up when she questions Socrates. So we want to know what Eros is, and so it's a kind of desire. You're feeling passion for something. What are you feeling passion for? And Diotima says at 204b and also at 204d, Eros is an eros for bodies, or the way that's translated in our text is that he is in love with what is beautiful. He has love for beautiful things. Good enough. Yeah, but it's an eros for what is beautiful. On that same page, 204c, she gives the flip side of that. What is really beautiful and graceful deserves to be loved. So she's marking out this relationship between beauty and eros, with the idea that our eros is that which is excited by beauty. And beauty, similarly, is something that calls for that response. Right? That's the right way to respond to something beautiful, to have this kind of passionate enthusiasm for it. But so in that way, we've named something about what inspires it, or when this experience is triggered. But that doesn't mean we automatically know exactly what it is. Like, so, what do you want to do with that beautiful thing, or what's the issue there? And then this is where she gives her first really distinctive and interesting interpretation of Eros. She says, okay, it's a desire for something. What is it a desire for? What is it that you want to do? And she says it is a desire to give birth in beauty. She says that at 206b and again at 206e. The desire to give birth in beauty. We're going to get clear on what that is in a minute. But here, this is the thing I want you to think about, right? That to notice that just because you have some kind of desire for that thing, you don't yet know what that desire is. You haven't automatically identified what it is that you want to do. And this is where, as I said, we are used to certain kind of interpretations. Oh, you're supposed to see a beautiful body and you want to do these things, right? And she's saying, well, that's already an answer to the question. In fact, it's an answer in two different ways. It's answered which beautiful thing, because you're thinking about a beautiful body, and you're answering what it is that you want to do, whatever those familiar sort of sexual activities are. But her speech is taking both of those things as questions. And what she wants to show is that both what the beauty is that inspires us can take different forms, and what exactly we want to do is a little bit different than just that familiar activity. But anyway, so the way she says is to give birth in beauty. And so giving birth, well, now that's pretty interesting. And notice, giving birth is, again, a distinctive thing that women do. So Diotima, the woman in this speech, is also naming a distinctively female activity. It's not exactly an activity, but something like that. Reality of giving birth as the essential thing. And so you give birth to that with which you are pregnant. And then she says, of all of us, we can be pregnant in body or in soul. And she says that at 206b and again 2080 and 209a. She talks about what that means. But so basically the idea is, if the idea is that you want to give birth in beauty, that means you want that with which you are pregnant to be able to come out. And that's what beauty does. Beauty inspires in you the desire to bring out those things that are inside yourself. She says at one point, well, I'm going to come back to this too, but she says at 209c, she's talking about a young man in this situation, and she says, he conceives and gives birth to what he has been carrying inside him for ages. So there a man is being talked about as in a way doing the woman thing. Yes, that's a bit odd. But the point is that distinctive kind of female reality is the thing that she says is at the heart of, let's call it our sexuality. I want to talk about what that is, if that's a real point, but I just want to underline this point again. Like, it must be a little bit odd and unsettling to all these very manly men at this symposium to hear Socrates saying that what their sexuality is really about is like doing the woman thing and giving birth to something. we can just sort of sit back and appreciate the sense of this and see how insightful these ideas are and so on, and that's great. The insights are great, but I think it's worth appreciating how provocative and challenging it must have been to those men in that context to hear this being said. Anyway, the provocative language aside, I just want to focus on the point. You're pregnant in body and soul, and so she then says what these different kinds of pregnancies are, and this is what she says at 208E and 209A. So she says some people are pregnant in body, and so and she's talking about men now. She says they turn to women and pursue love in that way, giving themselves through childbirth what they want, right? While others, and this is the point I want to stress, while others are pregnant in soul, because there surely are those who are even more pregnant in their souls than in their body. And now let me read what that amounts to. She says, these are pregnant with what is fitting for a soul to bear and bring to birth, as opposed to being pregnant in body and bringing forth a body. Right? These are pregnant with what is fitting for a soul to bear and bring to birth. And what is fitting for a soul to bring to bear and bring to birth? Wisdom and the rest of virtue. Which and then she goes on about that, and I'm actually going to read a fairly long bit, but first I just want to hold on to that. So, what is it that she's saying we are pregnant with as human beings, that to which we are inspired to give birth in the context of beauty, the appropriate kind of beauty, where this is the real heart of what our Eros is about: wisdom and the rest of virtue. Right? So those things, wisdom and virtue, are what the sort of secret meaning of our sexuality is. But so let me read on here. So she says, wisdom and the rest of virtue, which all poets beget, as well as all craftsmen who are said to be creative. But by far the greatest and most beautiful part of wisdom deals with the proper ordering of cities and households, and that is called moderation and justice. Notice right off the bat, quite interesting thing. She's just named the very three groups that Socrates says he was questioning in the Apology, right? Poets, craftsmen, and then those who order cities and households. Ordering cities would be politicians. The people who order households, I don't think that Socrates actually mentioned them, but basically poets, politicians, and craftsmen are the things he talked about, and that's what she names here. And she says those ones, the ones who are good, they beget wisdom and virtue. And that's, remember, what Socrates was after when he went investigating that. So again, I'm not going to pursue that. I just want to draw your attention to that connection. Well, or let me put it this way. She's saying that Eros, are that sexual passion, whatever that is, that which is at the core of our sexual passion. What that really gives rise to is that which is really the good of poetry, crafts, politics, and so on. But anyway, let me keep reading. So she's saying, so this is what happens with people who are pregnant in soul. She says, when someone has been pregnant with these in his soul from early youth, while he is still a virgin and having arrived at the proper age, desires to beget and give birth, he too will certainly go about seeking the beauty in which he would beget, for he will never beget in anything ugly. And so basically, she says here and earlier, the encounter with that which you experience as ugly is that it sort of leads you to withdraw into yourself, where the nature of beauty is it leads you to express, leads you to bring out of yourself. And that's kind of she's identifying that as kind of the core experiential meaning, or maybe we could even say existential meaning of beauty and ugliness. But so she says, if someone, when someone has been pregnant with these things in his soul, if he's a virgin, he arrives at the proper age, and he will desire to beget and give birth to these things, and he will be looking around for something beautiful in the context of which he can do this begetting. Now, since he is pregnant, then he is much more drawn to bodies that are beautiful than to those that are ugly. Right? That's where our experience of beauty tends to begin, the experience of beautiful bodies, and that's what we're attracted to. But if he has the luck to find a soul that is beautiful and noble and well-formed, he's even more drawn to that. That grips us even more as human beings, right? And then such a man makes him instantly teem with speeches about virtue, right? So in the context of meeting a beautiful person, we are inspired to care about beautiful things. And that's what comes out of us, right? What we express of that which is pregnant, that within us, which is our pregnancy, is what comes out is speeches about virtue. Like we get eager to talk about about good things. He'll talk about the qualities of a virtuous man, the qualities a virtuous man should have, and what are the right activities to engage in, and so on. In my view, you see, when he makes contact with someone beautiful and keeps company with him, here's the line I read before, he conceives and gives birth to what he has been carrying inside him for ages. So the core point she wants to make here, and that this speech sort of revolves around, is this idea that it is in the nature of human beings to strive towards the good and towards wisdom. The point that was already made in the Phaedrus. And that's what we strive for. And that will come out of us in the context of having passionate engagement with a beautiful person, right? Where being a beautiful person means having a beautiful soul. Right? So initially, our passion is fired up by beautiful bodies, and no doubt that doesn't go away. But that passion is even more deeply spoken to by a beautiful soul, by a person who is beautiful. And that brings out of you your aspirations. And that notion that there are different things that can come out of us corresponds then to different things that can be beautiful. So she says this at 210a, and then again at around 211c. So she says, a lover who goes about this matter correctly must begin in his youth to devote himself to beautiful bodies. Like that's where you first experience and sort of cultivate this fire that's burning inside you. Right? So if you're led aright, like you should be erotic, and that should lead you to have an eros for one body, to love one body, and so on. But then he should realize that the beauty of one body is brother to the beauty of another, and that if he's to pursue beauty of form, he'd be foolish not to think that the beauty of all bodies is one and the same. Well, so the thing she's saying there is like, yeah, initially one looks beautiful, but then you start seeing there's a lot of other beautiful ones too, right? So she's saying, like, it's the natural thing for you to find the whole realm of other bodies beautiful, right? But when he grasps this, he must become a lover of all beautiful bodies. And after this, he must think that the beauty of people's souls is more valuable than the beauty of their bodies. So that if someone is decent in his soul, even though that he's scarcely blooming in his body, our lover will be content to love and care for him, and to seek to give birth to such ideas as will make young men better. ... Right? So the thing she's saying there is, there's more than one beauty in the world. And, we most immediately are fired up by beautiful bodies. But we are quite able to recognize other kinds of beauty too. And if we actually give ourselves over to participating in this world of experience, it should be the case that naturally that what excites us in one body will be something that we later find excites us in a lot of bodies. And then we should find that people's souls excite that in us too, even more so. And then she says, again at 211c, she says, this is what it is to go aright, or to be led into the art of love. One always goes upwards for the sake of this beauty, starting from beautiful things and using them like rising stairs. from one body to two, from two bodies to all beautiful bodies, and then from beautiful bodies to beautiful customs to learning and so on. So she doesn't mention the word soul there, but she talks about the things of soul, which she's actually mentioned on the preceding pages, like knowledge, laws, and so on. So there's and as she says, we go from one to another like rising stairs. So there's kind of a ladder of beauties, and those beauties correspond to us climbing up the stairs, right? To a series of developments in our own Eros. So the thing that I want to say here, to say what this really powerfully adds to what we were saying about beauty when we read the Phaedrus, is that beauty is inherently educative, right? That allowing yourself to be passionate about beauty is allowing beauty to have an effect on you. Beauty encourages you to bring out of yourself what you have within yourself. It lets you kind of express your nature. And it is the nature of beauties that as you learn about beauty, you will find deeper and deeper kinds of beauty revealed, from bodies to souls and so on, that will bring out of you these deeper and deeper things. So then that's a description of what's really going on in our Eros. It's kind of like the motive force in human life for our highest development. This is a pretty interesting idea, right? That you often hear of sex as treated as a kind of a dirty thing or something kind of denigrated, and people don't want you to do that. They want you to be moral and so on. In Diotima's speech, it is that very sexual passion that is what gives rise to all those highest things, right? So sexuality isn't something to get away from; it's a thing to cultivate. But cultivate doesn't mean just thinking, "Oh, I'm going to go have, genital intercourse with everybody I can think of." Cultivate means allowing that thing to grow and develop in its own proper way. And I want to just say one last thing about this, and that is that she also says back at 202e that Eros is a spirit, or the Greek word is daimon. And she says spirits are messengers that shuttle back and forth between the two, and the two she's just named are a god and mortal, between the human and the divine. So I want you to think about this and its correlation again with what we said in the Phaedrus, right? Remember the point Socrates made in his speech at the Phaedrus was that beauty is this amazing thing that is kind of the announcement, the enunciation of the divine, like the things of highest eternal value in our everyday world. It's the announcement of what's there right here. The announcement of the infinite and eternal in the finite and temporal, something like that. So beauty was kind of the link between the mortal human world and the eternal world of highest truths and so on. And she's saying exactly the same thing about Eros. Eros is that which plays the role of connecting the human world and the divine world, right? So you should be able to see these two things are clearly paired, right? The Eros is the driving force in you, which is kind of naturally paired with the attractive force of beauty. And it's when those things connect that the highest values become present in our human world, or in our human experience. And she also says at 206d again that beauty is in harmony with the divine, which again is just a reminiscence of that same point. So I just wanted to point to these things about Eros as a daimon or spirit, and the idea that beauty is in harmony with the divine, to just bring out directly the connection between this point that's being made here and that point in the Phaedrus of beauty as being a kind of a gateway between, so to speak, the human and the divine. So anyway, I hope that helps you get that sort of core, exciting point that Diotima is making, or that through Socrates' representing of her views, about the distinctive meaning of our sexuality. So sexuality starts as this enthusiasm for bodies, but what it has in it is passion for, what's important. And it's in the context of cultivating our eros for beautiful souls that it becomes possible for all of our highest aspirations to be developed. So we'll leave it there with our study of Plato and the ancient world, and we're going to go on from here to see what the modern world has to add to this story.